Okay, so hello everybody, and thank you for attending and engaging with this session today. I am Fionnuala Darby, and along with my colleague from the library, Lindsay Dowling, we've organised this event today, and we're delighted to have a mix of staff and students here from across our university, and I know there's some people from beyond too. So you are all so welcome, and a special hello to my own students who have come along here today as well. So TU Dublin welcomes University College London in a virtual setting to learn lessons for our university on how to liberate the curriculum. So I just want to give you a very brief session overview, and then we'll hand over to Victoria for the main event. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Noreen McNamara from the EDI Directorate, who's going to have some opening comments for us here today. Noreen is leading out on the Athena Swan application and also the strategic plan for race equity at our university. Then the top billing here today is to hear from Dr. Victoria Showunmi, the staff perspective, and Arushi Menon, the student perspective, both from UCL and who've been involved on liberating the curriculum there. And I can't wait for that, to be honest. There will also be some opportunities for Q&A and discussion, so please do use the chat box, raise your hand, and Lindsay and I will try and moderate and keep an eye on that as best we can. After that, then I'm going to hand over to Lindsay Dowling to outline the Building Multistories project, which is currently underway on diversifying the curriculum at TU Dublin. Then after this, Victoria and I, and all of us, I hope, will engage in some myth busting. And then finally, to close the event, thanks to Dr. Barry Ryan, the Programme Manager on the Impact Project, for his closing comments today. So first of all, over to you, Noreen.
Thanks, Fionnuala. Thanks a million. Hello, everybody. So as Fionnuala said, my name is Noreen, and I am here on behalf of the EDI Directorate in TU Dublin. So this promises to be a really wonderful event. I would like to thank Dr. Victoria Showunmi and Arushi Menon for taking the time to be here and share their expertise with us on advancing race equity and liberating the curriculum. And thank Fionnuala and Lindsay for all the work they've put into organising this. A key role of our directorate is to facilitate the integration of equality, diversity and inclusion into all agendas and processes in the university. It is to that end that we are currently funding small projects or co-funding a number of other projects that promote EDI within the university, one of which is Fionnuala and Lindsay's Building Multistories project. Just to note, we are currently have a second call open for the EDI fund. So if you're working on a project that challenges discrimination and inequalities, please do take a look at that. I will post a link in the chat box shortly. This talk today on myth busting and liberating the curriculum also ties in well with two other projects that are underway and on which we welcome everyone's input too. First off, the institutional Athena Swan Bronze Award application and action plan, which looks at how we can advance gender equality in TU Dublin with due regard for the intersections of ethnicity and gender is being progressed. A self-assessment team of over 40 staff from right across the university and at all levels are working hard on putting it together. Currently, they are analysing the results of the recent staff survey, and they will also be conducting focus groups with staff on their experiences of the work environment, career advancement and the impact of COVID-19 shortly. I will post the link to the expression of interest for those focus groups in the chat box too, and also the link for the Athena Swan suggestion box. So we welcome all feedback. We particularly welcome your participation in the focus groups, and we welcome all feedback on gender equality in TU Dublin through the suggestion box. Secondly, and most importantly, as Fionnuala said, the draft TU Dublin Strategy and Action Plan for an Intercultural University with a focus on race equity is currently being drafted, and it will be sent out for consultation shortly. So this addresses the needs of both students and staff. A working group of 20 staff and student representatives have come up with the initial draft. So please keep an eye out for that, have a read through it and send us your feedback. Some of the insights we gain today will no doubt feed in well to this strategy and action plan. So I won't take up any more of your time, just to say we're delighted to be here. Really looking forward to hearing all about liberating the curriculum, and it's very heartening to see this and other projects really progressing across the university. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Noreen. We appreciate your comments and hearing about some of the work going on at the EDI Directorate. So I've had the pleasure of chatting with Victoria a few times in advance for planning for today, and I'm delighted to officially introduce you now to Dr. Victoria Showunmi, who's an assistant professor in education at the Institute of Education at UCL. Victoria's work on Athena Swan, race equity, and her involvement with UCL's Liberating the Curriculum working group means that she's lots to share with us today. And when Victoria concludes, there'll be some time for Q&A and discussion. So Victoria, you have about 20-25 minutes. So I'm going to stop presenting and hand over to you now.
Okay. Right, okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Finola, really appreciate that. So I'm gonna, I've been tasked with just saying a few words really. So I'm gonna start off with a little bit about who I am, and then I'm gonna go on to Liberating the Curriculum and how that is, works within UCL. So, okay, so who am I? I think that's really important when we ask ourselves that question when we're doing work within anything to do with equality. It's important to kind of unpack that particular part. I'm currently co-chair for Athena Swan within the Institute of Education, which is as part of UCL. Now, what that means is that I'm actually taken forward on Athena Swan Silver. So that's the first thing, and I think that's really important if you know what that's about. And the Faculty of Education is a large one. It's the Institute of Education. The second thing as well is that I'm an academic, do a lot of work around the area around gender and race and class, which is around the intersectional work of regarding leadership and also work around women and development. Another point as well, which I wanted to say, is some associations which I belong to as well, which is BELMAS and also AERA. BELMAS is the British Educational Leadership Association, and also AERA is the American Education Research Association, which is a very large organisation. I'm on the executive for the SIGS, which is a big role. Now, what kind of things have we been doing? I want to also mention that I worked in Maynooth as well a couple of years ago. So some people would have remembered that I was somebody who did some exemplary work in Maynooth as well. So I think that's important. So just in case you kind of thought, oh, I've seen that name before. So I kind of been in Ireland, so I kind of understand the Irish kind of concept of how it reflects itself, especially when it comes to rural parts of the country. So I was very kindly asked by Finola to talk about liberating the curriculum and what that actually means and how we've done it within UCL. So I have been very much involved with the liberating the curriculum from the very beginning. I think the most important thing, let's start off from where we're starting, from the top of the tree. Our provost at the time, which was Michael Arthur, came in with this idea that he wanted to do a connected curriculum, and what that meant in all its particular ways of looking at things. And so what that started to think about is when you look at liberating, the liberal arts colleges within the universities within the US, they have a particular way of doing things where everybody does a particular unit across the university itself. So that was some of the kind of thinking around that. So they set up a steering group, which was the steering group for connecting the curriculum, and that really brought together a lot of people, which were deans, heads of departments, and various other management groups of people, which wanted to start to have that discussion, what that would look like. So they broke that down into sections, and there were sections. There was one looking at assessment, there was one looking at organisational aspects within the university, and there was another one which I'm going to focus on, which was liberating the curriculum. And the reason they started to do that is because they wanted to start to look at how this impacted the whole of the university, and it wouldn't be very good just to pull apart one part of the jigsaw, because the whole of the jigsaw started to connect with each other. So we start off with Michael Arthur with this vision, which is our provost. You then start to think, okay, so what is it I want to do? So all the students and staff start to understand that there needs to be some changes which have been made. Can I put that to one side at the present moment? And I want to bring you in line with something else. As this was starting to develop and it was starting to develop, and it landed itself within the arena. An arena was a place, I suppose, I don't know what the equivalent is within your university, but it's a place where it's around academic development. So it would be where people are developed to be, if they want to do get their kind of HEA, we call it, teaching fellowship, or they need to do you support induction teachers or researchers, and all place people like that, and all different kind of developments, initiatives would happen within that particular part. It's a very, very a good place to be, but it's also around the development of academics and also professional staff. So at the time all of this was happening, there was also a researcher who came in, and he put together our first conversation, and the conversation invited the provost to take part on that. And that was called, why is my professor not black? And it started off with an initial kind of a few people which were going to be part of that. There was a panel, and the provost agreed to be part. And over 500 people took part in that. They came and they took part in that. That really opened up the doors to start that question of why isn't my professor black? So that took a whole notion on itself, and it kind of spiraled. And you started to also see that across the UK and different parts of the country and different parts of the globe as well. You also had connected with that, why is my curriculum so white? And that started to go in a spiral as well. I give you those because I think you have to kind of try and take the context of what we were trying to do. So that was a researcher by the name of Nathaniel Coleman who started to do that. Now let's go back to Liberating the Curriculum, which I was sitting on and I was part of. There were 3 co-chairs for Liberating the Curriculum. There was somebody from the arena, which is the academic development unit, let's use those names. And there was also a student from the student union, because we're very, very understanding that the students are the heart of this, because without the students, we wouldn't get paid. So the students were part of that. So they were co-chair. And then, of course, there was myself as well. So we co-chaired. And we invited people from different parts across the university. There's a large university to be part of this particular discussion. What did that mean? So we wanted to really engage with the library, with researchers, with teachers, with senior teaching fellows, a whole range of different people to try and get a change moving within the university. What that meant is that we also put together grants, and they were called Changemaker grants. A bit like Noreen was just saying, Noreen was just saying just a moment ago, where if you put forward and you had an opportunity to do something which you want to make some changes around EDI, well, we were doing that. We were doing that as well. And it was to do with, it could be a joint piece of work, which was with an academic and a student, or it could be a group of students who wanted to do something, or it could be professional staff as well doing stuff. So all this was made available. The actual provost gave a large sum of money, which was over like a 3-year period, because he realized that there was so much was needed to be changed. So we had these grant changes and these grants, which were small scale grants, round about some, kind of anything up to, there were some for 500 and some for up to £3,000, which you could use to make some changes to contribute. We also had student fellows. We believed that we needed to ensure what could we do to make sure that students were able to be the voice, what took place in their departments. So we wanted to give power to the students to be able to make change happen from there where they're thinking, because there were different parts of the university that had never really thought about diversifying the curriculum. We also looked at okay, so we as we started to position people, we thought of what is it that we were thinking about when it comes to diversifying the curriculum. So we wanted to look at all the different characteristics. So whether it was to do with LGBTQ+, whether it was to do with race, whether it was to do with disability, whether it was to do with gender, we wanted to bring those up around the discussion around liberating the curriculum. Within that as well, we noted class, and of course, class isn't one of the special characteristics which is identified within the Equalities Act, but it was something which kind of binds everything together. So we looked at class, and we also included religion as part of all of this as well. As we were doing this, we spent time trying to work out with the group. We used to meet once a month. We met once a month and we set tasks. And it was tasks going back to your department, your faculty, with some key things for you to find out about what was going on within your particular area. That may sound simple, but it was really, really helpful because we needed to get a picture of what was happening. So if there was some good work which was happening, we started to build up a case and a directory of what was happening across the university, which came to the next thing is we built up a website. And that website was a live website. So if, for example, somebody in the library which was connected to engineering, for example, this is just an example, and they wanted to know, so what is going on within other parts of the university, which would help them diversify their curriculum. And they would click onto that and they could find, okay, so this particular piece of work, they're doing it like this in the library, in engineering, and perhaps we could use that to help us to do what we want to do. That helped colleagues who didn't know where to start. So that was the first step, really. Didn't know where to start, hadn't heard about liberating the curriculum, hadn't heard about, well, you know, how do I make these changes happen? So there were some of the small things. So the small things, like, for example, your book list, as in, you know, is it an all-white book list? Was it all men only? Did you know whether any females were actually any of the people which were mathematicians, which you were actually quoting? Were any of these types of things? So there were small things like that. To the extent of, so who is delivering the lectures in your particular university? Are they all one type only, or is there a mixture of the different people? So you had that. You also had, what about your students? What's the profile of your students? Who gets a first? Because we have first, you know, first 2 1s, 2 2s, etc. Who gets those marks? What is the breakdown of when it comes to students from marginalized groups? Do they struggle to get the top mark? Those things came in as well. To the extent of when we give the honorary degrees out in the university. So how many of those are black, or how many of those are not white, or not white in English? So we had discussions about that. So we took apart all the different aspects of what was going on. We also, in the conversation around liberating the curriculum, looked at the history of UCL. And the history was a little bit ghastly, which has happened to quite a few universities, which I expect if you looked at some of the history within Ireland as well, there was things there which perhaps are a little bit ghastly. And the ghastliness which we came across is eugenics. So we were then starting to tap into eugenics. So this took the life from the students as well, because the students felt that the lecture halls that they were sitting in were really, really not what they wanted to be in when the names were named after the eugenics or slave owners and enslavement, and they didn't want that to happen. So there was a big campaign went on with that. I suppose also what was really exciting about it is that we had various seminars which looked at the across different faculties, which looked at the connecting the curriculum and the liberating the curriculum. If I may talk about a small piece which I did, I got to be known about a particular part which I did for liberating the curriculum, which is on the website. You can actually go on and look at the website and see different things, which I did something about who am I? And that was something I did as a part of a lesson, which unpacked who you were, but it was around identity. And it really kind of got the conversation going, because the whole idea of the Liberating the Curriculum was to get the conversation going so people could feel empowered and not disgruntled with moving things forward. That was videoed. That was put as an ideal place for people to kind of have a look at and think whether they could adapt it or whether they could reach out and ask a bit more information about it. We also had were able to connect with other parts of London as well, and also other parts of the country, the UK, and talk about how the Liberating the Curriculum looked like. Now, other structural things which took place, which were part of what was happening to connect the curriculum, is that we had positions within faculty which were assistant deans for equality. So you had people who had specific responsibilities for equality within the faculty. That made a big difference. It wasn't the heads of department, but it was somebody who also had a specific task. We also have inclusion leads as well. Now, these people weren't just people which just did it because it was a voluntary, because most of the stuff was heavy lifting and you're doing it as voluntary. No, these people had specific tasks and they had workload. It was linked to their workload. So it was like they had a day a week or 2 days a week or 3 days a week to be able to do this work. And that made a big difference when we were doing this. When we got our students to work with us, our students also were rewarded. We wanted to ensure that our students wanted to be absolutely important to be part of changing the curriculum. But we didn't want them to do that at the expense of not being able to finish their degrees. And we wanted them to be able to have something for it. So there was financial gain for the students, and also some of the students were able to use that towards some of their degree as well, because of the types of things they were doing. And that again was very, very important to do that. I would say we've got some big successes. One of the big successes we've got as well is that we've got the Centre for Race, which has now been set up with Paul Gilroy, Professor Paul Gilroy, which if you're a sociologist, you would know, I'm sure you'd come across his work. And that was set up, and that was from the hard graft of students and working with the media to really pull together what was required to be able to put a lot of the conversation which had gone on for quite a few years about the connected curriculum. We've also got, what else? So we've got that one. Something which has come out of the connected curriculum, which is the bigger umbrella part, is that we also did a benchmarking. We did benchmarking, which was like a traffic light system as well, where we wanted all the different parts of the university to work towards that. So, of course, you know, we realised that you've got amber and you've got green and you've got red and all this. And we wanted that they were able to hold it up to departments or faculties to be able to measure where they are at, which is like an internal audit, but it had to have an honest conversation. And we've also got a convey on race, and that particular person was the one who would push the conversation around race as much as possible. We've now got, just recently, that this person's been appointed for the first time, a vice prof who is a vice professor who is their particular role is equality and inclusion for the whole of the university. So we have that, but this has all come out of the connected curriculum and also what that meant in the wider aspect of the university. I think one of the other things which I'd like to share as well is that within the monthly meetings, we would really make some real changes as we connected across each other. And at its peak, there could be at least 35 to 40 people coming to the meetings. And those were very, very powerful groupings during the time as we started to move forward. I think some of the things which have since gone on is that we've had a big unit under the student attainment, and to do with the student attainment gap, and that was a big discussion, and that's been taking a life of its own, and there's a lot of work going on that as well. So, you know, as I've said to you, it's all about how the students have positioned themselves, and they haven't. I would say, you might ask, so how is this, what's happened next? What's happened next? Well, what we're in process of now is bedding it down. Each of the deans have to do a pledge. There's a pledge they have to do. And that pledge is also linked to KPIs. So if, for example, they pledge to have, I don't know, maybe to employ or maybe to recruit more students, which are home students, which are intersectional in who they are, that's something, and they would have to be, they would, as they pledge that, they would then be looked into that, and they would be monitored and be accountable for what they've actually said. They might turn around and say, well, actually, I really want to, by the end of this academic year or next academic year, I would like to have appointed at least one academic member of staff who is not white. And that could be a pledge. I don't know. They're all making pledges at the present moment, and they're looking at it. But transformational change has been very big, and it's come from the connected curriculum, but it's also come from our the provost who's now actually left. We've got a new provost who started in January. You can look up what Michael Arthur said, but he came very, very openly and said that what he wanted to do is that he acknowledged that race was a big issue and racism in itself. And the first thing what he said was to do is to acknowledge it yourself. And once you acknowledge it, we can then start to work with it, because like all different organizations, you know, we have got it at our doorstep. And he talked about that. And that helped us with the actual liberating the curriculum. But I also think that, which I felt to kind of say to you, is working on what that meant. Liberating the curriculum, what did that actually mean? People didn't understand what that meant, to liberate the curriculum. So we did have some discussions about that it was to diversify it, to ensure that people felt comfortable with what they were delivering, whether it was to doing their research or whether it was actually teaching, and how that worked for itself, that we were going to liberate it in a way, because there was a lot of fear. There was a fear that people felt that, oh my goodness, what does that mean? I have to throw everything in the bin. I have to start from scratch. What does it mean? No, it means that you do what you do, but you need to ensure who are you reaching those students in the different ways? What are you doing to be able to help with capturing the student experience so they can engage with that more? And that was a really important part, that whatever we were doing, we wanted to be able to reach with the students, so the students felt as though they belonged there. So there was a lot of work done on belonging. There was so many different projects which were being done on different aspects of the curriculum and what that meant into how we diversify it. Finola, how am I doing for time? Because I haven't timed myself.
I was just going to come in, Victoria. You must have been reading my mind virtually. I look, I'm hearing loads of words. I'm hearing pledges, resources, part of your workload. This is something that's not ancillary, certainly, that has happened at UCL. That's what I'm picking up on. And the way you talk about it makes it sound so easy, which I'm sure is far from the truth. And I'm reminded, I suppose, of today's date as I was preparing for this event. Beware the Ides of March. And any of you out there who did the Shakespearean play Julius Caesar for your junior cert or your inter cert, some things just stay with you. This was the day that Julius Caesar was assassinated in the Roman Senate, led by the conspirators of Brutus and Cassius. So beware the Ides of March. And the reason I'm saying that is, I suppose anytime I engage with this area, I'm very aware of the potential resistance or reluctance. And I suppose I just wanted to find out, what did that look like for UCL? What was it, and how do you overcome it? Is it a small bump in the road or a major stumbling block? And what advice would you have for us in our efforts?
I think that's a really, really interesting point you made. Thank you for that. You have to have a very good set of broad shoulders, really good set of broad shoulders, because you will come across, but but we're all very liberal, and I think you're describing the wrong place here. This cannot be our university. I mean, if people don't want to come to our university, they should go somewhere else. I mean, it's this is who we are. So you come across, and I'm being a bit kind of, I'm pushing it a bit, but you do come across that, and people felt, well, this is a world-class place, and if people find it very difficult because they don't fit in, well, maybe they're not the right type of student to have in the first place.
Right.
And so
turning the
yeah, so there was a lot of there was some elements of pushing against what we were trying to do, because this is a place of excellence.
Yeah, yeah. And that is something that comes out a lot, that any of these initiatives that we engage in are somehow diluting the curriculum or the integrity. And what's your response to that?
Well, if you're teaching, for example, English, no disrespect to English, I'm not a person who does English, of course I do write English, you've got students. Think about in Dublin, for example, you've got students which are coming, which are from marginalized groups. There's areas in Dublin there's areas which are not white, which is very, very mixed. Mm-hmm. and may not be Irish, and Irish and white, and you're teaching, and the key textbook, or some of the key textbooks, really alienate some of the students, because they have no idea. It doesn't make any sense to them regarding what they're trying to do to get to the next level. And so to be able to give some books which perhaps aren't just Irish. I'm not saying it is. I'm just doing this hypothetical, so please don't shout at me. Which aren't just, for example, Irish history. Why would you not open up the door to perhaps have some African American history?
Yeah.
So then you'd be able to think. So you're still getting them to do the same thing, but you're asking people to look for a different lens. Yeah. And using that different lens, you could engage 20 more people in the class, because those 20 people in the class aren't white and Irish.
So would you say that's one way of fast forwarding this? Like how do we get it to take flight? Is looking at your reading lists, the way you assess, the way you give feedback, would that be a very good starting point, or do we need to go back further or look at something else as well?
I think one of the starting points is to get your students on board with you.
Yeah.
Because that's the first thing. That's the first thing. You may already doing that already, but you need to get your students on board. What is it when you talk to them about that? Because I remember talking to students in Maynooth. They were so excited that a Black academic was talking to them about that. When you start talking to them, what's your experience? What's your experience? Now, of course, you have to do that by trust. What's your experience within the curriculum? What's your experience of being a student here? And I think it's about that. It's getting that to, and once you start to get a group of students to be able to work with, and that your colleagues trust the fact that the students have a voice to be able to make some changes, then you can start to move forward. But if for example, Finola, I know you wanted to shut me up, and I will shut up, I promise. If, for example, Finola, you asked some of your colleagues and some of the students to come together, and your colleagues weren't happy about that because they're standing academics. And what do they think they're doing? Why is the student telling me what to do? I'm the one in the classroom here. I'm the one doing the research. What do they know?
Yeah, it's always a bone of contention. I just have one more before I open it up to others, or if there's anything coming in, maybe Lindsay can tip me off. How do you know it's having an impact? Like, how do you know it's working? How do you know where's the evidence that you can point to?
I think the student you've invited in will be able to answer that one. I think that's really good. But I think the other way is that people are talking about it more and more across UCL. Now, UCL has over 45,000 students, maybe a little bit more, and they've got just under 15,000 staff, so about 14,500 staff. And out of that, there's 8,600 academics.
Yes.
So you're now experiencing that people are talking about this.
Yeah.
Now you could argue that, well, people is part of their promotion now. You've got to show some aspects of understanding, because it fits in the mission statement of the university, the 5-year objectives. All of this is part of EDI and part of the connected curriculum. This is serious stuff now. It's written in to some key things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Victoria, you and I are going to engage in some myth busting with others in a little bit. I just want to see if there's anything that anyone would like to come in on or comment on before I move to the next section.
I have a question. Sorry, I know I'm probably cheating because I'm part of this, but I have a question for you, Victoria, if that's all right.
Yes.
I just one of the things, obviously you had mentioned that this kind of started with the connected curriculum, and coming down from kind of the provost, and I think that's, apart from like Ireland in general not being as far along in this process as perhaps you are in the UK. One thing that, I kind of am struggling with is, because you had the guidance sort of from the top down, there was already that buy-in in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have to the same extent, or certainly it wouldn't be as unified. So, you're talking about kind of positions of special responsibility within faculty and, or like library collections. But how do you advocate for that kind of centralized or ring-fenced funding if you're kind of coming with the begging bowl to a door, like, whereas your provost, it sort of came from the top down, so there's possibly less of a fight around that, or less of a, kind of a begging bowl, as I say. What's your kind of position?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely spot on with that. I mean, he did come in within his first, I suppose, 18 months, whatever, and said this is what he wants to do. And so it was more of a platform, but there was still a lot of pushback, because for the things I'd said already, and also, people's kind of priorities. I think they hoped that it would perhaps not go, it would go away. So what it was about, what we did, the Liberating Curriculum group and the Connected Curriculum, but the Connected Curriculum was the umbrella group, and then so under the Liberating Curriculum, we saw all these things, and people like myself have been doing this work for many years, saw the hiccups, and so we said, well, what we need to do, we needed to connect it to their KPI. We needed to connect it to the department's developmental plan. So all those things we used as ways to be able to make this happen. So yes, you've got people which, felt, well, the 50p I've got here, I need to use it for something else, and I haven't got a spare pound because I need to use it for that. But we put it into it had to be written into the developmental plan. It had to be part of the benchmarking. It had to be part of this. So they couldn't be caught out of that. And if they only had £1,000 example, whatever, they said, well, out of that £1,000, you've got to commit something out of that £1,000 to be able to be part of this equality. Because we were also doing, Athena Swan is massive across UCL. We've also got the Race Equality Charter. So all those things, to be able to get any of those, you've got to be able to connect it to all different parts of the department.
To measurement.
Yeah. Exactly. Does that help?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like, I think that's the thing, it's how you kind of frame that argument for the give me money argument, if you like, and how you can kind of measure the value for that. So there's another kind of question, or quite an interesting comment here from Stephen Long. Stephen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on your comment.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Stephen. I'm from the Disability Service in City Campus, but I come from an academic background in sociology, political science, and specifically post-colonial theory. And I was just wondering, we've had kind of circulars around kind of race reading groups and that kind of stuff. And one of the things I've noticed, and it's been an area, I worked as a researcher in equality studies for many years. And it's the notion of unpacking the terminology in terms of me coming from a background in post-colonial literature. And the term race is used an awful lot. And I've always felt it's really only useful in terms of going against racism. And in order to unpack the term, to not, go along with the notion that race is an actual biological thing, and rather it's a political construct. And I think an understanding of that for all staff involved, based on not so much colonial works as a lot of academia is based on, but a good reading of post-colonial literature, and particularly coming from Ireland, because we have a wealth of post-colonial literature and authors here too. That maybe that will be a very good start for academics and staff as an understanding of the notions of othering and the construction of the other. Because I think sometimes, I've been involved in particularly in the area of disability, and I regard all marginalization as the same. It's othering, really. Should we start looking more in terms of how we break down this notion of we are helping them, and rather we are diverse?
Yeah.
And I think it's a very vital kind of starting point.
I think you're absolutely right, and maybe we'll go on to this with the Miss Buster in a bit later, because of the fact that's what you've got your speaker coming. But yeah, you're absolutely right, and the key thing around, look, Stephen, I know that I've said this already, and I will say it again. If you as a university or colleagues in the university are serious about this work, you have to look at who you are. You have to be able to say, I'm a white male, and I understand I'm white and I'm male and I'm Irish. And yes, I've also had X, Y, and Z. But within Ireland, we also have an issue which is to do with race.
Yeah.
And when you say that as a group, you're powerful. And then you can start looking at white fragility and what that means when you have that discussion about white fragility. Whereas if you mention it and people aren't ready for that, you get a wall up and you get defense. And then it becomes a kind of an anger around, well, what do you, if they don't want to live in Ireland, well, they don't have to live in Ireland. Well, actually, they were born in Ireland. So what about that then? Well, so you get all that kind of debate going on. So that's the bit where you have to be absolutely 100% about, you know what, I got my heavy boots on and I'm grounded. And when I'm saying to the person, you know what, Steve, I like what you're saying, but white fragility is something which you need to kind of grapple with. And then you'll say, yeah, Victoria, you're right. How can we do that together? Then we're already starting to make that bridge, because we're saying, how do we do that together? But I hope you're staying around, because we're going to have more conversation about this.
Yes. Thanks, Stephen. And we'll definitely pick that one up. I think it comes up in a bit. Anyone who knows me knows I'm militant on timekeeping.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
I'm just going to move on to the next section. And I know Arushi is there. Arushi Menon, you're so welcome. Arushi is an undergraduate student of geography at UCL, but currently the women's officer at the Students' Union at UCL. And you're going to give us your perspective from the students' perspective. And Arushi, there's about 10 minutes and then maybe some time for a little bit of Q&A, or we can move into the myth busting. So you're very welcome virtually to TU Dublin, and we look forward to hearing your perspective on this through the Students' Union. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. My apologies for not being able to be here from the beginning, where, I'm sure you guys have an SU, you understand how insanely busy that is. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Arushi Menon. I was a second-year geography student, and like I said, I'm now taking a year of my studies to be UCL's women's officer, which is one of the full-time sabbatical officers of our Students' Union. So I've been working on a lot of equality issues, ranging from getting free period products in bathrooms to helping write a report on the student barriers to race equality, or ensuring we have culturally competent mental health services. So let's just get straight into the juice of it. When we talk about decolonizing curriculums, too often the conversation tends to shift to the need to change up the reading list, or reference articles written by women. And don't get me wrong, from a student angle, that is incredibly important too. Seeing the history of your discipline and the nature of your studies to be full of similar people, none of whom are anything other than white or male, is a deeply damaging concept. For white students, it just confirms the already existing societal bias, the academic norm, further perpetuates this idea of, white intellectualism, and the rest of us that were, just never quite civilized enough to have societies that could ever have ventured into academic inquiry. And then, for students of color, it's deeply isolating. It undermines the right that they have to be there, making it even harder for those students to feel confident to speak up in classes or exert any level of authority or presence among their peers. But that being said, the need to liberate the curriculum is a much less surface level effort than that. And, there are much more insidious and larger scale issues that the curriculum needs to be liberated from. For me, at least, it's fundamentally more about culture than anything else. The culture of the whole institution, the faculty, the department, all of it individually, and the sum of all of those parts, right? So my apologies, I don't know all that much about the culture of your university, but at UCL, the core culture is definitely one of anonymity. It's something to do with the central London placement, over 40,000 students and counting, the massive decentralized institutional structure. All of it adds up to UCL being very much not a campus university, with different departments with often little to no cohesion at all. So here for us, it tends to come down to individual departmental culture, which is much harder to see and tackle. I mean, even identifying key sources of harm to students of color becomes a much more it becomes a legitimate struggle when we're looking through sprawling 60 departments, all with wildly different pedagogy and departmental cultures. But that being said, disclaimer out of the way, there are definitely some overarching cultural issues across the higher education sector that fundamentally harm those students, right? And one of the main examples of this is always lecturers' ideas of what makes up their ideal student. The search for and insistence upon what people call independent thinkers in their students is always a key example of this, where a lecturer ends up very much unintentionally favoring white students. What a lecturer usually means when they say that is they want a student who's confident, holds opinions, feels able to express those and challenge others, but still very much stays within the lines of expressing it and within the way that's expected for that module, writing it up, structuring it in specific essay structure that's most likely to get them the best marks, and so on. And that kind of request will always put more burden on students of color. I mean, the first way it does so is obviously in respect of cultural competence, very much the word of the year. I've heard it constantly. Students from specific cultural backgrounds, especially international students, just can't be expected to be immediately comfortable with challenging authority in the same way you might expect home students to. This kind of thinking isn't an international staple. But as well as that, home students, and especially white home students, are much more likely to implicitly understand what abstract concepts like a lecturer just saying, we want you to be independent thinkers, actually means. Like I've mentioned, there are really clear lines that a lecturer wants you as a student to stay within when expressing that independence, and knowing those boundaries is knowledge that's just expected to be implicitly known. And that's something those lecturers often don't see, is that those students of color have to put in significantly more time and effort figuring out where those lines are and exactly what's expected of them, a lot more than a white home student ever would. And then, of course, another part of all of that is student unease, right? If you're going to call it microaggressions, death by 1,000 cuts, just slowly taking those hits again and again. That's how you end up with students from minorities being uneasy in spaces where white students would never even think to be anything other than comfortable. Okay, let me try and give you an example of that. UCL has a really big problem with space. Right, we're in central London, we don't really have all the classrooms that we need, so we often end up, renting out random hotel lobbies or nearby building meeting rooms to just use as temporary educational space. And in my second year, this happened quite a few times. But the one I want to talk about is the very first lecture we had of a certain module, which was at the Royal Asiatic Society. It was already a really uncomfortable place to get to, hidden in the mews of Bloomsbury on a road no one knew existed before that day. And, the name itself just kind of sets off a few red flags in your head. What kind of place is called that? Especially what kind of place is called that and has an office in Bloomsbury? And it was exactly what we thought. I'm sure it's exactly what you're thinking. From the moment we walked in, there's a very large painting of 4 very important-looking white explorers and an elephant. And then plastered all across the walls is their logo, a large, very decorated elephant. And, to me, it was immediately obvious what kind of place we were at. It's quite clearly a colonial remnant from occupied India. Those white scholars of Sanskrit in the 1800s, all Whig MPs or something, would come to engage in critical discourse about the intriguing and hitherto undiscovered wonders of the new subcontinent that they owned. I mean, not new at that point, but you know what I mean. And I found myself like looking around at the students around me, looking for some kind of acknowledgement of where we were and what had been happening here. And however, what I found was everyone else, on their phones, discussing how much above the word count they could successfully go for their essay that was due next week. I mean, the only student whose eye I caught was the only other student that wasn't white there, who, shot me this like quizzical expression, as if to say like, yeah, this is weird, but I didn't expect much better. And, went back to her friends. We were the only two to even actually notice. I mean, a quick Google search is enough to, see that the place where we were was the main discussion point where people started talking about the controversial Aryan invasion theory, its close relationship with the Oriental Club, its membership historically being key empire officials and so on. But no one else even saw where we were. And that's the point. Right, the lecture began. To the right of the lecturer was another very large painting, this time of some military officials and an Asian king. And the lecture was about geology. Why would they possibly even address where we were? This wasn't some kind of like anthropology lecture. I mean, in fact, I suspect the lecturer even barely noticed where we were. But the two of us that saw that, our responsibility there was clear, right? Focus on the lesson, take the hit, absorb and ignore the screaming elephant in the room. These things are all small one-off instances to that lecturer or to the university. That's their job. They've been here for years. It's just a small thing that happened and they barely noticed. It's not even like it was their decision. It was probably just someone at admin. But for the students, the ones who are only here for 3 years, for whom the glimpses of these institutions are only the glimpses that they're given, this is a really clear indication of either ignorance or exclusion. And when we're talking about it from the point of view of the student and their experiences, does it really matter which of the two it is? I mean, the message there is pretty clear, right? The university, I guess, is just as hostile as the rest of the world, blissfully unaware or uncaring about the students, expecting them to just sit there, take it. It's not like I'm going to get up and interrupt the lecture and make a fuss. I mean, even if I did, nothing would probably happen. It's not like we have another room. Yeah, I mean, it's just blah. And I think there's another aspect to that, which is that universities don't understand just how strong that power of word of mouth is, especially amongst minority communities who tend to be close-knit groups, right? Students tend to know which lecturers have made weird comments. They go into those lectures knowing they're going to be uncomfortable, but that's the price they have to pay for a peaceful education. There's zero tolerance policies for harassment, especially racial harassment, that are touted everywhere. They're always a lot easier said than done. For those structures to work, it requires this level of trust and communication across the academic community that just isn't there. You need staff to trust their students, trust their ability to come forward when they see unacceptable behaviour from staff, trust in their willingness to work to make the university a better place to study, and of course to trust that they'll only come forward with the truth. And as well as that, it needs to be clear exactly where and who to go to. An issue that I see time and time again at UCL is this perpetual murkiness around reporting, mostly because the key people who students are likely to return to when things go wrong aren't the people who can actually do anything about it. All people who know how to direct them to someone who can do anything about it, to be honest. The main people that students are likely to go to are their key points of contact, lecturers, tutors, etc. But that's not the formal reporting structure. That's a person you can trust and confide in, and it's imperative that students know that. I get a lot of emails from students telling me how many times they've brought up racist or sexist comments made by a professor and how frustrated they are that nothing's been done. And the people that they've told are the most senior people that they have contact with, namely those tutors. It's not the university's casework team or the equality diversity team. No one directed them to make a formal complaint through what at UCL is called the report support page, or even explain to them that any of those things were options. To be fair, I'm not even sure those departmental leads they went to knew that those were options. And in a moment of crisis like that, it's unreasonable to expect students to be able to deftly navigate the complex bureaucracy of higher education. And it's really important that the key people that they might go to are able to do that for them. I mean, it's not that everyone needs to want to go through the formal reporting procedure. Those things take months or years sometimes, and they have a great toll on the students involved. But they need to be able to make that as an informed decision for themselves. And if they can't, it just creates and perpetuates that same culture of this just being a thing that happens. This is just what it is. There's a lecturer who uses the N-word sometimes. I've mentioned it to a lot of people, and no one's going to do anything about it. I guess that's the way it is. If I want an education, I will just have to take the hit. And that's not appropriate, nor is it true. But communicating that is exactly what's so difficult here. And I mean, I think the point there is then, so what do you do about it? How do we keep at that equalities work? How do we stop, or at least acknowledge and tackle that sense of constant unease that we know students of colour feel? And the key there has always been to include students in that level of university decision making. Most of the time, these students really do know what is wrong with their education. They can clearly identify what's making it harder or more uncomfortable for them than for everyone else. And if you let them, they're always more than happy to do something about it. And embedding this at every level of the university is how we get to a point where we know that those students are at least being heard on in their concerns. I mean, you might already have this in a departmental level with reps and things like that, but it's always key to ensure that you have an equalities focus on that. You know, having things like course equalities reps who people can come to, who can cause actual actionable change. You know, we know these things take years. We know these things take longer than a student can be there, and that is just pointless. You know, it's about including those diverse student perspectives in higher up university discussions, students having their perspectives on this and having those heard. It's about valuing that time and that emotional labour that those students are spending on that work. You know, it's time that they could be spending on a part-time job or doing something for their degree. That's work that deserves to be paid. They're spending that time on improving the university. Yeah.
Great.
That went a little longer than I meant it to. I am sorry. I mean, the point is, yeah.
Wow, Menon, I think, or Arushi, I think you have lifted so many stones there today for us all to think about as educators from the student perspective. You know, I'm engaged with this work, I'm interested in this work, yet you say so much today that really strikes to the core of what it must be like for students. And often my students, some of them would say to me, would you stop poking at this stuff? Would you stop talking about this stuff? That it's nearly easier for them to just, as you say, take the hit and get through because they're there for 3 years or 4 years. You know, our student populations changes by 25% every year. One gang goes out and a new gang comes in. And for them, maybe it's just not worth the while. So I think we need to look back then on the university and the systems perhaps that need to change, because it's just too difficult for the students to try to do this. Do you feel? To talk about it, to report it, to find somebody to talk about it who might listen and do something about it.
I mean, basically, yeah. The biggest problem we tend to come across is these things take so long. Like, getting action done, especially in a university, takes years, and it takes so much out of students. And for the students that are in those positions where they're actively trying to engage in that work and actively trying to make the university better, what it often ends up meaning is they get students coming to them with all these issues that they're facing, with them going, lecturers have said this and that, and knowing that they can't actually do anything about it in a way that will affect or improve that student's experience. They can affect it maybe in 5 years when they've long graduated, the student that came to them about it has long graduated. You know, it's about the university making sure that anti-racism is like constant, active work, and that the lecturers are aware that those students are doing that. They are taking those hits and trying to mitigate that in whatever ways they can.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I hope you can stay back for the myth busting. I think you might have some perspectives there on the statements that are coming up there. If you wouldn't mind, Arushi, if you have the time, that'll be in about 5 minutes' time.
Fionnuala, sorry, we have a student from City Campus, Nwabuogo, apologies if that pronunciation isn't great, who just had a couple of interesting comments to make. They came up in the chat. Made based on Arushi. Sorry?
I think that's Ogo. Is it Ogo? Staff. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Oh, you're on mute there.
Ogo.
I'm not a student. I just work with international students.
Sorry.
That's fine. That's okay. Because the thing is that sometimes I do, like, the first thing was, most times when the African students come, once they see me, they just walk up to me. And then I don't work with Africa. I just work with all the students. But they have like their recruitment managers that actually deal with them. And they will kind of say they want to talk to me. And then sometimes the things they say, it's not academic per se. Like when I say academic, it might have to do with what they are going through, with what's happening to them in Ireland. And so in the process, I kind of made some very good relationships out of that, like, you know. So sometimes I like to ask them because I'm like, this is where I work, and I like to see how we can improve their experiences. So the last meeting I had with some of them, one had finished his master's and the other one is still doing her master's. And I'm like, okay, what do you think we can do to help students? How can we, support you better? I don't want to use the word help. Like, how can we support you? What can we do to change what we've been doing? And they said to me that the orientation classes that they do when they start, that when they even come in, they don't feel like they belong there. And for me, living in Ireland for 19 years, I didn't even think they'll be feeling that way. Because sometimes when you pass through some experiences and you overcome them, you tend to forget. You wouldn't realize that other people that are coming in are passing through that, but you have passed through it. So you kind of tell, oh, they can deal with that, okay? So they said that the first thing is that the first culture shock is that they don't even understand what the lecturers are saying. It has to do with the accent, and they are so afraid to ask. They are so afraid to even say, hey, I can't understand what you're saying. And then they might turn to their neighbor to ask, do you hear, can you understand the accent? You see, so they said to me, even if they can do something for the group and then talk to them, like where a lecturer can address them, one-on-one, or just pick like the African group or the Chinese group and just address them one-on-one, that they feel more comfortable when they are in their own group, so that they can address the issues and then they can ask the questions, you see. And then another thing they said is that a number of them, they failed their first semester exams because the teaching modes are so different from the way they teach them in Africa. So that first, some of them didn't even understand what plagiarism is, which might come as a shock or surprise, that if they can even take them and explain that to them, because 2 or 3 students came and they failed their exams and they were like, the lecturers are racist. And one of them had been here. So he said, listen, they are not racist. I've been through this. And I was lucky somebody explained to me, this is how they write. I said, but I said to them, but part of the orientation is academic writing. He said, yes, but they don't even understand what is being taught in academic writing. So these are things that I hope, like, I'm thinking I should discuss with the student officer, and then also bring in the regional managers, because they, like, when you're talking, sometimes you think somebody's understanding you. You feel comfortable when your accent is similar to the people around you. But when it's not, because some of them, they are so conscious that maybe when they talk, somebody might say, oh, you have a thick accent, and they don't want to, even, it has to do with even their names, so the culture shock, like she said, culture, I do understand what she means, the culture, because it's one thing to talk about liberating the curriculum. It's another thing to actually start doing. If your culture does not embrace the doing fact, then of what use is it?
Yeah,
so
I agree with you.
All I have to say.
Thanks, Ogo. I think you're hearing stuff that many of us don't hear. And I think, this is one of many, many important conversations that need to take place. And I think we've an awful lot to learn from each other and from you, and in particular about what you hear that we don't necessarily hear. And thanks for sharing that. And maybe you might be around for the myth busting later, Ogo, as well.
That's fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll just mute myself and close my class.
Thank you. Me too. I'm just going to hand over to Lindsay now, and she's just going to profile one initiative that's taken place that will hopefully make things better in terms of the curriculum. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it just strikes me from what Arushi and Ogo were saying there that, the project, which I'm going to pull up slides on now, the project that we're looking at is kind of resource diversification and teaching students the necessary skills to actually find and analyse kind of diverse resources. And there's definitely a role, I think, for library teaching in terms of working with students that are having difficulty in class around issues like plagiarism and academic writing. That's something that we do quite a bit of in the library, and there's definitely a role for the library in all of this. So we should definitely talk offline, although probably online in another forum we'll go. I'm just going to share my slides here, and there we go. So I'm trusting that everybody can see those okay?
Yes, thanks, Lindsay.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I'm the assistant librarian on the Blanchardstown campus, and myself and Fionnuala are co-leading the project Building Multistories, which set up the seminar today. So it's a pilot project basically to diversify curricula through student engagement and embedding the library services to achieve it. It's a collaboration between the School of Business and the library, both in Blanchardstown. It's co-funded by the Blanchardstown Campus Library, the Impact Project, and Barry Ryan will be speaking to you at the end of today, and the EDI Directorate. The library is supporting the project through the acquisition of materials and collection development, commitment of staff time, and then also information literacy teaching for students, as well as the use of library resources. So that's marketing resources and the physical space if we ever get to use it again. The School of Business is also, as I said, part of the project. So the pilot is being run via a Year 3 business module that Fionnuala teaches called Diversity in the Workplace. And our students are actually at the seminar today as part of their training in this area. So essentially what we're doing is we're teaching students how to find, analyse and recommend diverse resources for their courses, which in turn will assist in library collection development. So as I said, we're using a Diversity in the Workplace module as the pilot. So students are critically engaging with the topic of diversity, and this includes a group assignment in pre-allocated diverse groups. CA requires students to find diverse resources, including non-academic resources and not just text resources, and they're to recommend them for their reading and resource lists, to analyse them, and then to make recommendations for the library. There's also a requirement for a reflective learning piece from each student individually. To support them in that process and learning how to go about that process, students have had 3 hours of library training so far, as well as ad hoc support on an individual basis. And we've covered things like search and discovery, analysis of resources, and also referencing. So kind of basic library training, but then also kind of critical analysis, annotated bibliographies, that kind of area. So we assessed the training then based on, there was a multiple choice quiz and also a short continuous assessment assignment to test the skills and for a short reflection on the process. So I have my final classes with the students tomorrow, and we'll be doing feedback, but most of them are here today, so I can tell you all did really well, so you'll be getting very positive feedback from me tomorrow. So we've also organised a number of seminars as part of Building Multistories. So there's today, and then we have another event on the 20th of May with Marilyn Clark, who's Head of Library Services at Goldsmiths College, and she's going to be discussing their Liberate Our Library campaign. So that was a campaign that was both kind of pedagogical as well as collections focused, and also included training of academic staff in the areas of diverse teaching and use of diverse resources. Goldsmiths are also going to be doing a training session for our library teaching staff, so that this work can kind of be incorporated into our information literacy teaching at TU going forward. And I mentioned then as well library collection development. So we have a Discover Diversity collection, which is bringing together a number of our existing resources as well as 30 new resources. And then we will have another number of patron-driven acquisitions based on the assignments that the students will be giving back to Fionnuala. And if there's anything that you think we should be including in the library, you can certainly let me know. Through this work, we hope to promote an approach to curricula and resource development that includes diverse voices and ideas, underpinned by embedded information literacy training. So specifically, we plan to develop an adaptable guide to extend this approach to other modules. We're planning to publish a paper co-authored with students, to develop a resource list, as I said, called Discover Diversity, and expand the library collections. Ongoing training will of course be part of the future for us, for staff and for students, and we hope to organise more events and develop a community engagement process. We also really want to establish a community of practice in TU Dublin in this area, so we'd love anybody who's interested to contact us. This project kind of came about because myself and Fionnuala got chatting and realised that we had a lot of kind of common ground and shared values, and it sort of came together somewhat organically. So, you know, it's been really successful so far, and I think if we could extend that into a community of practice on an ongoing basis, we really could achieve something really valuable in TU Dublin. So our contact details are here, and as well as the logos of our 3 benefactors. So if you have any questions, happy to answer them, or we might do it at the end of the myth busting session. I think we're a little bit behind time. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lindsay, for capturing that work. I mean, because I'm in the thick of it, you know, I feel, God, I should have done this years ago. And just a reminder to those students of mine that the project is due next week into me for grading, and I can't wait to see what you've come up with. I'm really looking forward to that. So I'm just going to invite Victoria back in, and Arushi perhaps as well, and any of you really to engage in some myth busting. I'm going to share some slides. So Victoria actually hasn't seen these in advance, so belt on, Victoria, and see how we get on with this. And these are statements that I suppose, well, they're a mixture of statements that have come up, you know, from staff and from students, but also that are in circulation in general. So some of them are quite provocative, some of them are myths, some of them are fact, but of course they're all open to debate and discussion. So here goes, Victoria, the first one. So Black and can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Yep.
Black and minority ethnic students are less likely to leave higher education with a first class or 2-1 degree and less likely to be employed 6 months after graduating compared to their white peers.
Yes, that is a fact.
Yeah,
that is a fact.
And do you capture that data? Do you capture specifically?
We do actually. Yes, we do capture it, and you may or may not be aware within the British press that there's been a lot of discussion around this over the last, I would say, 4 years. And UCL has been leading on some of this, especially around degree attainment and what that means for students which are not white, because it is very subjective, and how you get a 2-1 and how you don't get a 2-1, and whether somebody deserves a 2-1 because you feel they deserve it without any evidence about it is something. And yeah, and of course one thing which you need to add to this, of course, Fionnuala, is the fact that COVID-19 and the impact that's going to have on students getting work, definitely.
Yeah.
And I could say more about this, but I expect you want to go on to something else. But
I'm sure it will overlap with others. So I just have a bunch of rolling slides.
There's one thing I wanted to say about this as well, is that some work which I was doing, which is called Suffering in Silence, and it's around black suffering in silence, and the experiences of Black women. And I say that because many end up with mental health issues because they've been so-called achievers, in quotes, because people will say, oh, but the Black girls are doing much, much better than the Black boys. But then you have to ask yourself, at what cost? And I'm talking about university now, not just at school, at what cost? And many of that is because they have suffered internally anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and all this type of stuff. What has that got to do with employment? Well, they also are on that revolver of internships. So you get on an internship, you do 6 months, you get on another internship, and if you do that and you do that, you can turn yourself into a chameleon, you'll get a job. And so 3-4 years go by, they still don't get a proper job. And so many end up doing jobs which were nothing to do with their degree. I know lots of white students might do that as well, maybe out of more choice. But these are students which are really committed that they want to be a lawyer, for example, they want to be this, they want to be that. They can't get through the door because it's not about glass ceiling, it's concrete ceiling. I'll stop there for that.
Okay. Well, you kind of segue in nicely into the next one.
Fionnuala, can I say something, please?
Sure. Yeah. Ogo, is it?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. So, Victoria, you just nailed it. It's really suffering in silence, because it's not about getting the 2-1. I know people that got 2-1 first classes that up till today, they are looking for jobs. And I don't like, I'm not really big into research. Maybe like when I say research, like written book research, but I do my own research. I know at least 11 women that have masters and they've been looking for jobs. 2 in particular, they volunteered to Citizens Information Center here in Ireland, and 1 worked there for 4 years as a volunteer. And they will have positions that they need to fill. They will bring people, she will train the people, and they employ somebody right under her nose. And they never give her employment. She volunteered for 4 years. Okay, like she says, suffering in silence. We take it all. We'll be like, okay, we'll keep trying. Okay, fine. It's not citizens information. Maybe I should volunteer to Amnesty. You stand on the road, you volunteer, they never take you. Okay, maybe I should go back to study something. It's not, I've studied HR. Now it's social care that is given the work. You then study social care, or you then go into nursing because nurses are needed. Social care workers are needed, then they take you. But when you now want to do something like HR, something like law, something like business, it's so difficult. Like she said, if there's anything stronger than a concrete ceiling, it's concrete ground, it is stronger than concrete. Because you start, like for somebody like me, I always use myself as an example. And I have friends that are like me. Some practically gave up. And I said to them, listen, I don't want to study to be a nurse. Nursing is not my calling. I don't want to study to be a social care, a social care worker. That's not what I want to do. I worked with my law degree in Ireland. I worked as a healthcare assistant with rehab care for 4 years. You can imagine the pain I was going through, knowing that I have a degree, I'm a professional, but yet I'm working as a healthcare assistant. I started with TU Dublin from the lowest of the lowest grades. But these are the things that we face as Black women. I say to sometimes my Irish friends, like seriously, I don't even say to anybody that like my law picture is nowhere. My certificates, I keep them under because it hurts my heart anytime I see that. But you see, I started from the lowest, I'm growing and I'm learning. Like for somebody like me, I try to make the best wherever I find myself. And then I say, it's good that you're going through all this. So when you hear these stories, they will not sound like myth to you. You pass through it. So somebody cannot say to you, is it myth or is it a fact? You have
Exactly.
you have
you are the story. Actually, Ogo, you're the story behind this slide. You know, you have that experience.
Yeah, exactly.
That you just shared.
Yeah, and I like what you were doing with it, and I'm really interested in what you're saying. Is it Obogo? Yes. Magwogo. But I'm also interested. I'm interested in the whole thing, and I'm interested in other people's voices as well. I think it's and this is the thing. Once it starts tapping into yourself, and because you don't get an opportunity to speak about it in a platform, I think it's really important. But I saw the next slide you put on actually, which was the myth or fact, and
middle-class white women benefit the most from EDI initiatives.
Yes, I mean that is becoming very. I mean, many of us knew that anyway, but there has been a piece of research which is done to really support that statement that out of all of this, the people which benefit the most are white women, and the rest and the people which benefit the least are Black women.
Yeah, and is there anything then, Victoria, about using your platform as a white woman to raise these issues, or is it always seen as, well, you're still going to benefit?
I think you have to ask yourself the question. So when you're in Ireland and people are talking about gender equality, you have to have the courage to say, so when you say gender equality, who are you talking about?
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing when I was in Ireland. Do you put your hand up and say, so which women are you talking about? And they may say, well, I'm talking about women. Yes, but are you talking about women looking like me? Or are you talking about, are you talking about women which are Chinese? Are you talking about women which are Asian, women which are mixed race? Or are you just talking about white women? But to be able to do that, you've got to have the guts to be able to do it. And that's what Arusha was saying as well. You've got to have the guts to be able to do it, because students aren't going to have, all of them aren't going to have that agency to be able to do that, because it's emotional burden. It's emotional burden.
Okay. Okay, next one. I'm just conscious of time as well. The term woke has come to mean the opposite of what it means. What does it mean?
Arushi, do you want to say this, and I'll come in on the back of you? I'm happy to do it, but I thought you might want to start with that one. What do you think?
I feel like there's always two completely different conversations happening whenever you speak about this. It seems like a conversation that when I'm speaking to other students, when we're having that, it seems like a term that everyone understands. It seems like it means something similar. And then you go into academia, you go and try to speak to high up university officials, you're trying to speak to someone who can enact change from this, and it's like you enter a different universe, especially when you try and use words like woke, where I mean, I personally just suspect it comes from the desire to like hyper categorize what words mean and to go, this is exactly what this means, and this is, whereas especially for the age range we have in education right now, those people that have grown up with things like the internet and the definitions of words so constantly evolving, that's fine. But this idea of the term woke has come to mean the opposite of what it means. I'm not so sure I agree. I think to me that seems like much more of a myth, and it much more seems like the academics who seem to have gotten very caught up with Twitter discourse, but they forget that they're talking to real actual people about their real actual experiences.
Okay, thanks, Arushi.
Yeah,
Victoria, do you want to?
I think Arushi's actually, kind of nailed it really. I think I'm happy to do the next one. I think that's okay.
Yeah, problem.
Yeah. Now this is my favorite.
Shadism plays a role in society. So this is a specific type of racism that some shades of black are better than others.
This is a pet one for me, and I'll spend a minute on this if I may. I mean, shadism / colorism is something which we're heading down the road in a journey. Now, within the UK, we appear to be saying some different things, which is that we like to use terminology, for example, BAME, which is Black, Asian, Minority and Ethnic, and we like to use other terminology, like, for example, we might want to use white, brown and black, and let's stick with that one for a moment. And when you're looking at white, brown and black, what does it actually mean? Well, it means that the white are on top, the brown are at the middle, and the black are actually at the bottom. And that notion is also feeds into colonial speak, because if we then start talking about, well, if you're white, you're all right, and if you're brown, stick around, and if you're black, don't come back. We're still with that aspect of apartheid, and shadism becomes this biggest thing. I only heard on the radio just the other day when a prominent Asian person who was speaking, and she was talking about whatever her experience in wherever it was she was, and she was talking about being brown and being brown in school. Now I know for a fact that she wouldn't be able to be talking about in a London school. I didn't grow up in London schools, and how she was brown, because she would not have been able to deal with that within the school playground at the time, because what she's doing is positioning herself as she's brown. And so she has a kind of more, she's got experiences, but her experiences are very different to somebody who's black, because the person who is black is getting the absolutely bottom end of the rudder, and so there is a divisiveness around this notion of shadism and colorism, and the media loves it because they're able to pit against it, and the people which lose out on that are people which identify as black, which are not even black, because if we're talking about brown, we're all brown. None of us are non-white. And when you ask people about that, you say, well, you've called yourself brown. Tell me a little bit about what you mean by brown. And they start talking about this and that and everything else. And they say, well, do you identify yourself as white? And then you get this kind of little bit of a silence. Well, no. Oh, okay. So when you're walking along the street and someone's calling you a derogatory term, are you going to defend yourself and say, no, that's not me, I'm brown? Or are you going to recognize that that person doesn't really care whether you are not white, and that's the end of it? That's what I want to say as that aspect, but it does have a big thing to play in the divisiveness of what that means. And of course, Finola, when we talked about this before, when you think about when in the 60s, which has also crept back in society at the moment, when they had the discussion around no Irish, no blacks, and no dogs.
Mm-hmm.
There is a discussion which is starting to develop within the UK at the present moment.
Yeah, there's a hierarchy of acceptance almost.
Exactly.
Myth or fact, white people don't know how to handle race issues that arise in the classroom.
We can do that together, actually. Alicia, you start and I'll finish because I'm an academic and you're...
Yeah, that's true, I don't. I mean, yeah, but it's something to do with that idea of white fragility. It's to do with that idea of white discomfort. It's even being called out for not noticing something invokes that idea of white fragility, even amongst other students, where you go, did you not notice that he made that weird comment and it sounded a bit dodgy? Or did you not notice that giant poster on the wall? And then the white fragility that comes from just going, oh, no, I didn't realize I was supposed to. You're making it all about race. This is just the room that we're in. He just said a thing about the conversation that we were having. Yeah. I mean, and that's not even thinking about the white lecturers trying to give a lecture about race, especially in I'm a geography student, especially in those especially in culture-based conversations. There are some very hilarious lectures about Trump that went on in the last few years, very clearly, where it's a general problem that white people aren't aware of their own whiteness. They can't see it. They can be told it. They can accept that there is an experience they don't have. They can accept their lack of brownness or blackness or whatever, but they can't see their whiteness. They can't see the way that clouds everything. And that's exactly why they don't know how to handle race.
Exactly. And I've got an example. Arisha, I hope I didn't cut you off there, but I've got a really good example, which was in Ireland. And we were doing this stuff around LGBTQ+. And I was listening, and we'd gone into this particular session, and it was really, powerful. There was a play which was being done. It was a kind of a play which, those plays where they kind of act out a particular aspect of the experience, and really powerful play. And they were doing this, and it was about the voices of LGBTQ+ within school experience. And I felt myself feel quite emotional about it. And when I was feeling quite emotional, and at the end, we were able to ask questions, I said, well, do you experience, are there no LGBTQ+ students which are of colour within Ireland? Is this a voice so silent that you can't even portray it within the play you're doing? Yeah. And their answer was, well, we've just been given, the brief we gave was this. But it's not about the brief you gave. All you've done is LGBTQ+, which just represents white Irish people in Ireland. And what about the people which are not white and Irish, or they are Irish but they're not white? You've not even included that in the discussion. And they said, thank you for saying that. But also, one person turned around and said to me, they said, why is it always about race with you, Victoria? And now this is a room full of whiteness. There was about 400 or 500 people there. And I looked at that person and I trusted that person. And I thought, wow, this is deep. And I was trying to explain to them about this, but I realized I was being surrounded by a sea of whiteness. And I thought that put me back to when I was, because I grew up in a very white area in England. And I thought, wow, I thought Ireland's got a long way to go.
Yeah. And very lastly,
sorry. Isn't that a major issue though? Because it just rings bells with me, with the work I do front facing with students. And with the disability service, our students come from all backgrounds. The common factor is they all have a disability of some regard. And isn't there a lack of recognition of intersectionality in general? Because I see my students come in, whether they come from, whether they're, newly living in Ireland, whether they've lived in Ireland all their life, whether they're upper middle class or working class, gender, whatever. And, it's the whole gamut. And it's the recognition of intersectionality that gives you the relationship with a student that allows them to have agency and voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Intersectionality is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't give it enough attention that it deserves, I think. And just very lastly, just a simple yes or no on this one before we have the closing comments from Dr. Barry Ryan. Online teaching and learning is more inclusive. Victoria, yes or no?
I'm going to say more than that. No, it isn't. And the reason is because there's an assumption that people have access to good internet as their students. And the answer is they don't. So it's not inclusive. 40% of our children within the UK are either not engaged with it or they don't have access to online teaching.
Yes. And Arushi, from the student perspective, would you say yes or no?
I would say definitely a bit of both. It's a lot more inclusive for disabled students. It's finally gotten a lot of students to get what they've been asking for years. But on the other hand, it's also been incredibly harmful to students from certain minority communities, especially students, who have children at home, students, all those different things. Or, like we just mentioned, LGBTQ or trans students who've had to go back into the closet and be dead named by their lecturers again. Yeah. All of that.
And mental health is rife in it. Absolute rife.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So just before the final goodbyes, I just want to invite Dr. Barry Ryan in, who's project manager with the Impact Project, for some closing comments and then the final goodbyes and thank yous. So Barry, if you're there.
Hi Finola, hi everybody. Thanks for having me along. I'm on the beach here in the middle of Ireland. It was great session today. Very interesting stuff being discussed, and I must admit I'm kind of new to this area. Fionnuala's been dragging me along, informing me and educating me as I go. I'd like to first of all say thanks to Noreen for opening, and then to Victoria and Arushi for their critical ideas and comments from UCL. Hopefully we can explore a bit more into Dublin and enact hopefully in some way. And also before I go any further, to Fionnuala and Lindsay for pulling this together as as partly funded by the Impact Project. We're delighted to be part of this event and hopefully future events in this area. Just some things that came to my head when I was listening in intently. The connecting the curriculum from UCL was something that we've looked at quite a lot in TU Dublin, I suppose, and we've created our own version of the connected curriculum. We call it the co-created curriculum, and it's more of a bottom-up design approach. And out of that, we've created 4 shapers that I'm just going to pop in the chat box there, the link for people who mightn't be aware of it. And I feel that the 4 shapers might be our way to enable some changes that have been discussed today. One of the questions that kind of struck a chord at me when Victoria mentioned it is, why isn't my professor black? So we have to have something to stimulate conversation, something to stimulate debate. So the 4 shapers, step forward and try new things, make our learning experience active, useful and related to the world, use all of our talents, everyone has something to teach and something to learn, and create the space and time to do work that matters. So within those 4 shapers, we have the initiative, I suppose, to go ahead and make the change that's needed. If we've seen the chat box, lots of road to travel still in Ireland, lots of issues. We know we have a road to travel, but let's get forward and let's start going on that road. In terms of enacting change across the university, I think these shapers might be an opportunity to really widespread their use beyond just curriculum design, which is what they were designed for originally, and we can use them as a kind of a guiding set of stars for the university as a whole. So in terms of the Multistories project, it's great to see Fionnuala and Lindsay leading on this, and it is funded by the Impact Project, partly funded by the Impact Project and also by the EDI group within TU Dublin. So it's brilliant to see the funding being put to such great use. I suppose the key thing that came out of this is a need for a community of practice. For practitioners, John mentioned in the chat box, blind fear if you're kind of faced with some of the questions that Fionnuala put up. So as a group of academics, maybe we need to consider ourselves, listen to the student voice some more from a different perspective, I suppose, than what we've been currently listening to the student voice. And this development of a community practice, I feel, could be really a strong way to engage all stakeholders within the university. And there is examples of communities practice, again, funded through Impact. So there is a kind of a roadmap of how to set up and how to establish and how to build a community practice. So again, hopefully, the funding that have led to this Multistories project can be followed on through into community practice, because really, opening up the curriculum is for all disciplines. It's not just for the library to drive, it's for staff, it's for students, it's for all of the TU Dublin community to row in behind. And just one final thanks everyone for coming along. I know there's lots of commitments on any given day, so spending a couple of hours in a room like this, chatting to people, learning, understanding, appreciating is a good use of time, I think. So thanks, folks.
Great, thanks so much, Barry, for those closing comments, and you were clearly engaged with the session. I think it would have been really hard not to. Look, I've really enjoyed this. I'm into this area. I could talk about this stuff all day long. I suppose thank you to the contributors today, so Noreen and Barry and Lindsay, and to those of you in the chat box and those of you who've come in verbally as well, sharing your stories. And I suppose my biggest thank you really is to Victoria and Arushi. I know has had to leave. I'll follow up with her later. It's been great to have you here. I could never have imagined connecting with you like this. So every COVID cloud brings some goodness, so that we were able to do this online, and it's great to hear the UCL experience. And I look forward to our paths crossing again. Victoria, maybe you will help us out in our initiative some more and be a critical friend to us as we try and make some inroads in this area. But it was great today. We really thank you for your time and your insights, and we would love to maybe see you face to face if that can be allowed sometime, either in London or in Dublin, when time and post-pandemic allows. It will be lovely to meet with you.
Well, let's stay behind for a few minutes, Finola, because it'd be nice just to touch base. So I'll stay back until you.
And I'll just stop the recording now. So thanks to everybody. Have a lovely evening, and thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
Million.
Thank you.